Um, thank you. It's very nice to be here with PhD students. I like it. I have this background, not to show off, but more to a colleague of mine started to use all kind of weird artwork. He looked like somebody from outer space, like a sort of a messenger or an evil dictator or something. But that inspired several others of us to use artwork in our backgrounds, because you get so bored of looking at all those kind of weird interiors of people. And so maybe others also get inspired using artwork in their backgrounds. Yeah, Sylvia said, my background is from interior architecture and furniture design, and I worked with a lot with computers in design. And my PhD was in 2005, actually, about digital creativity, how to use computers creatively in design processes. And from that, I started to work more and more with systems. So from 2007, maybe, I sort of left my interest for computing, for tools in that types of tools, and started to work with the complexity and the systems. I assume you have had or will have some kind of intro into what systems thinking is. So I will not talk a lot about systems theories. There's this big field of, this really wonderful field of systems theories and system models, etc. All the many aspects and perspectives there, but I will jump more directly into what design is in systems thinking, or what it can be in systems thinking, and what kind of that relation could be. Let me just share the screen. Okay. This title of this lecture is the same as the title of a book I'm about to finish. I'm very slow, so this will probably be my maybe almost first, not totally first, but definitely my last book. So I actually don't like writing a lot, so I feel a bit sorry for you guys. You have to write, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 years. I spent 10 years doing my PhD, so I'm horrible. But I'm trying to finalize this book. It's almost done, called Designing Complexity, and it sort of summarizes the core and the ideas of systems-oriented design. I will just mention a little bit of this aspect of systems thinking in design, because it's nothing new. So we started this kind of conferences in 2012. It was very good timing. I think there were several people that were interested in that. And it appears to be sort of something new, but it's more like a renaissance or something reviving it. And I think there have been a lot of people working in that field from before. And this is sort of a list of people I think have been pioneers before we started. And probably some people are also missing there, but you also have Luigi Bistagnino here, who started this in 2000 and at the Polito in 2020 or so, or you have to correct me, Silvia, if I'm wrong.
The Professor Bistagnino started in 2000.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I meant to say.
Yeah.
2000, yes. And of course, these are typically all white men, and I'm sure there are some ladies here, but to compensate, I brought in Donella Meadows, who you might have heard of. Have you heard about her? Are you familiar with her work? Okay, cool, great. And one of her most famous quotes, and this is sort of also something that is quite central in how we approach systems in systems-oriented design, is we can't control systems or figure them out even, but we can dance with them. So this is sort of at, it's probably some kind of central perspective here. Then about systemic design as it is defined by the Systemic Design Association, and this kind of development through the years as a pluralistic field with there's many opportunities and many possibilities in that field, many possible places you can be and many ways of working. So we don't think that there's actually one correct way and there's one prescription of how to deal with the complexity and how to work with this, the complex socio-technical systems of the world and the problems we face, but we think that is needed a lot of different approaches, and that you actually maybe have to even to combine things and you have to switch perspectives, etc. So I put up this kind of tension field between design practice and design thinking and systems practice and systems thinking. And within that field, you can find many positions that are close to systems thinking theory or close to design thinking, or like systems-oriented design, which is a bit close to design practice. So we'll talk a lot about designing, design practice, and what is to try to tease out what is the core of this approach of designing and how does it relate to systems. This is sort of the knowledge ecology of systems-oriented design. And you can see that there are a few theories and methodological positions, but there also are practices that have influenced. And systems-oriented design is, as I put it in the lower left corner, as you remember, it's actually more like a praxeology than a methodology. And I will come back to that. But you see, it's quite a lot of different things that have been feeding into the what systems-oriented design is and how it's composed. You can search all these things if you want, and then you'll find it on Google Scholar or somewhere. So what does design bring into this? This is probably the most beautiful staircase in the world, to my mind. It's Art Nouveau architecture. It's Tassel House staircase in Bristol. It's a very famous staircase. So what does that mean? That we look at this picture and wonder, what does this have to do with systems? I think one of the most central things that design brings to systems and where it really relates is through this idea of an holistic composition of things. You try to find something that creates a whole that is traditionally seen. It should be harmonic, it should be expressive, etc. And I think the most powerful expression of that concept is made by Wagner, the composer, and was called Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a German expression, means a whole work of art. Wagner did, though, have a quite limited conception of what that was. It was limited to the stage. People were not part of it. The audience was not part of that work of art. You would be outside the work of art and look at it from the outside as an audience. But what was on the stage would then be a total work of art, of combination of music, stage arts, and let's say movement theater, etc. That was his conception of it. But the idea of this kind of whole work of art is much older. Already in the Renaissance, or to put it the opposite way, actually, the fragmentation came much before that. So even the need to talk about the whole work of art is something that came because there was a fragmentation of those skills. So in the Renaissance, people didn't care much about if they did interior or exterior or landscape. Michelangelo did all these kinds of things in an integrated way. Sorry. But also others, like I will show you a few examples. This is the Suleiman Mosque in Istanbul. The architect was Mimar Sinan. The interesting thing is not so much the mosque, but the kulia, which are these things that are around the mosque, which were a part of the whole complex of the mosque. And they were public services, like addressing the society. They were serving everybody in a way, even rich, from the rich to the poor. They were about knowledge, about giving birth, about food. I actually know a guy who was born in the maternity facilities of this kulia. So it was still in use not so far long ago, and the library is still there. Another example is the San Lorenzo de El Escorial in Spain, which is like the summer palace of the Spanish kings. And it's almost built in the exactly same time as the mosque. Look how symmetric it is and how restrained and planned. If you look at this one, you could even imagine here to add more. You have some facilities over there. You could add more to them if you need more. But here, this is like a closed design. It's you cannot add. You cannot imagine easily to add anything to it. So it's very fixed and not as dynamic as the other one. So this is but it's a whole work of art, and it has all this multifunctionality similar to the mosque, but not addressing poor people, obviously. So, well, you can make your thoughts about that. In the Bauhaus period, they were also thinking of the whole work of art, but in a slightly different way. They were addressing all aspects of art, but not necessarily putting it all together into one piece of art, but they were working across the disciplines in a very natural way. As you can see, the theater set up by Oskar Schlemmer and the geometric theater, very weird stuff. But this, yeah, I mean, this kind of natural and necessary interdependence between the arts it was more natural than a planned and interdisciplinary collaboration as we most often see today. I want to pull off one guy who is not so very much known, Cesar Manrique. I simply love this artist and architect from Lanzarote. If you ever go to Lanzarote, you should really explore what he has done. He was obviously a very progressive architect doing this really fantastic buildings, but he managed to do something quite amazing. He really boosted the tourist industry of Lanzarote by creating a lot of very cool tourist attractions, at the same time boosting the identity, the local identity of the Lanzarote people. And he did this through emphasizing what is special with Lanzarote. In addition, he made this pilot plan, which was a sort of a plan for how to build on the whole Lanzarote. If you have been there, you notice probably that there's only one building that is more than 3 stories high. It's the pilot plan. And you can see this kind of color scheme. You can see on this picture, the green, the white and the green, the white and the blue, the white and the brown. So he made some very rough guidelines. Sorry about this. I have to just close down this telephone. He made some very rough guidelines that were carried through and that were used throughout the whole isle in a way. And this is not Manrique, of course. This is more not high quality architecture, but it's from a tourist resort I was on. But you can see the influence from Manrique. You can see the low buildings. You can see the color schemes, but you also can see his early sustainable system thinking, where he invented these lava gardens. Instead of making grass mounds, which would require a lot of water, he invented this garden which didn't need any water. It's like covered with lava pebble, and it's beautiful. So what is behind this? It's all about to reach this whole. It's all about composition, bringing seemingly unrelated items together into the whole. So here it's a painting by Kandinsky, and you can see it's a kind of dramatic painting because it's so contrast in a way. You have this really big blurb here on the upper left corner, and there's and somehow it's still balanced with all these weird elements. And I think that's why it's called a work of art, actually, because it's very cleverly done. And this points towards another aspect, which I think is quite important, and that also leads back to systems thinking. It's the notion of Gestalt and Gestalt psychology, and Rudolf Arnheim's notion of visual thinking, which has been quite central to systems-oriented design. I want to just read a little bit of this text about compositionality, because it's much more than what you see in the Kandinsky picture. It's something that goes on every day in our brains. Compositionality refers to the evident ability of humans to represent entities as hierarchies of parts, with these parts themselves being meaningful entities and being reusable in a near infinite assortment of meaningful combinations. Compositionality is generally considered to be fundamental to language, but many believe, as do we, that it is fundamental to all cognition. So you see, compositionality or composition is central to how we think, actually. That's what they claim. Objects and scenes, for example, decompose naturally into hierarchy of meaningful and generic parts. Furthermore, compositions help us to identify parts unambiguously. It is often the case that components cannot be correctly interpreted in the absence of the contextual constraints imposed by their incorporation, etc., etc. And these are actually mathematicians who say this. But I think it's quite interesting to see how they think that composition and compositionality is so deeply a part of our thinking. So how do we compose things? Rudolf Arnheim says perception, seeing and smelling and feeling and cognition are inseparable. So that's totally interlinked. Perception, seeing is an active composition process. This leads right into the core of Gestalt psychology, which means that while seeing these sort of flat, meaningless figures, we create shapes, we create a sphere, we create a snake, around a pole, we create a triangle here. So this is the active seeing. We cannot avoid it. It's totally entrenched in our nervous system, in our eyes, in our brains, etc. So this kind of visual thinking is very central to, it's a central argument to why we work with visual thinking in understanding complexity in giga mapping, which I will come back to. So Gestalt psychology is the theory of how we, through perception and conception, create wholes out of fragments of partners. It's closely related to systems thinking, actually. And all of you heard, of course, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. You all heard it saying. It's wrong. It's a wrong citation. It's a falsification. It's a dummification of the original pronouncement by Christian von Ehrenfeld. The whole is different than the sum of its part. And this is a really important distinction. So it's actually different. It's qualitatively different than the parts. There's a certain laws in Gestalt psychology, which are quite cool to explore. Like we create the closure of the E by we understand it's an E even if it lacks. You see, these are things we cannot avoid to do. So it's a fun thing to explore a bit. You probably already know about that. I'm not sure how much you know already or not, but maybe I'm already telling you and running through open doors, but let's give it a try. So this is all nice, but what are the pitfalls of reaching to the holistic design approach to try to urge for this, creating those wonderful harmonic and closed wholenesses of design? Of course, there are some really bad pitfalls to run into. We can over design. We want to over clean and over order things. This is highly connected to the current design culture, which has a tendency to hygienic and sterile, or I don't know, it's almost like Puritanist or reformist expression, and I truly hate that. It signals a notion of control, calmness, order, and this kind of whole idea of a Western good lifestyle. One thing that to my mind really went wrong is this huge project from the 80s in Norway, which was it's the National Bank, which has an almost mechanical way of trying to create a whole by repeating this kind of phasing of all corners in the whole building. It's even down to the corners of those profiles. You see this 45-degree with this kind of edging. And I heard that even the teaspoons do have the same thing, and it's quite lifeless and brutal in a way, and careless. You are not emotionally connected to it at all. It is utterly consequent. The Nazis were actually very good at making holistic designs, holistic design solutions. They were all over, from graphic design to everything, even including trying to design human people, as you know. This is from probably the biggest ever light installation ever happened. It's the Cathedral of Light in Nuremberg in 1936. And it had over 150,000 people there. And what is really scary about it is, if you dive into this, I did a little bit of research into it. There's a little research around what role design played in the Nazi regime. But you really start to understand how central and how important design was for the Nazi regime. It's almost so that you think it couldn't have happened without the design, because nobody can say they would be not touched and not carried away if you were there. It's almost impossible to imagine. And this spans from Hugo Boss to Diebitsch, the design guru of the Nazi regime, to graphic design, to ceremonial rituals, design in the streets, etc. So it's so penetrating everything in society. So these are the dangers. So we need to have a strong ethics in whatever we do. So the urge for composition is a strive for the perfect. If it's that, what comes out of it, it's probably very, very problematic. If you remember Kandinsky, this kind of weird composition that has all kinds of imperfection in it. Open designs, living life is open-ended, and it's unpredictable in many ways. It's unfinished, imperfect, and dynamic. And the combination of objects creates new relations and tells life stories, just like in this picture. And we need to appreciate the imperfect and never try to even have this crazy idea that we will able to design the perfect systems. The Japanese have a saying for this, it's wabi-sabi, the appreciation of the imperfect. So back to this, I will talk now a little bit more about maybe the practice of systems-oriented design. I think I usually say that systems-oriented design is a methodology without methods, if you understand. It's a methodology is the thinking or the conversation about methods, about how you do things. So you can actually have a methodology, but you don't necessarily need to have a lot of methods inside that methodology. A method, to my mind, is a prescription of how to do things. So how to bake a cake. If you follow that prescription, you get a good result. To my mind, you cannot do that in systemic design because of what we just went through. It's far too complex, too dynamic. You have to cope with imperfection. You have to cope with unexpected kickbacks from the system, etc. So you have to remain flexible. You have to be able to respond on things that happen. And this all points to the notion of praxeology. Praxeology is not a new term, but it's not so very known because people don't care about practice. I think practice is really hierarchically on the bottom of everything, but I think that's the most important thing you can have. Nigel Cross mentions it in 1999 in a paper, but he doesn't really say what praxeology is. So I've tried to put them a little bit more into what it means. Praxeology is like the collection of experiences, skills, techniques, embodied knowledge that is collected by practice. So unlike methods, you can choose to use parts of any practice, or you can choose to modify it at any time. It's more flexible, it's more like based on the experience, and it's more individualized. It's also related to phronesis, which is ancient Greek expression of practical wisdom, the ability and intellect to act in the world. And it is also related to the notion of thrownness, to be thrown into a situation and not knowing what to do, not to act as also consequences. When you work with systems, you very often are in that corner. You know you have to do something, but you don't know exactly. You cannot know what, and not acting is not the solution, because the system will play out in ways that are uncontrolled. If you know Horst Rittel's Wicked Problems, I think he writes a lot about it in his Rittelson papers. So I will give you an example of the difference between the praxeology and the example and the scientific or method-based example. So the first one here is a systems dynamics model of, it's about migration in Southern Europe, Italy maybe, I don't know. And you can see there's a very particular way of modeling. You have all these arrows. I don't know how much you know about systems dynamics as one of the most central perspectives and approaches in systems thinking, but there's a very prescribed way of constructing the models. You have those little plus and minus of the arrows, which means these are negative and positive relations. That doesn't mean good or bad.
They have also a course in their path.
Okay, so I don't need to explain more about it.
I don't know. It depends if they choose to follow it or not.
Okay.
Some of them probably have done, some other not. So
yeah. For now, it's enough to know that it's a model you can put right into a computer because it's based on quantifying everything. So we could put numbers on all those elements and then you could compute it actually. So needless to say, this is a very useful model, and it's used, these systems dynamics principles are used in many, many central aspects like weather modeling, etc., or climate, even climate change modeling. However, it also has its limitations when it comes to work with human or socio-technical systems. Here is a praxeology examples. I was thinking of all those arrows. There's black arrows. There's only arrows. They have the only difference between them is that they are more bold. Some are more bold than others. Maybe, oh, you have some double arrows too, but they're all arrows. So I was thinking, is that it? No, I think we need to be more precise when it comes to define what are relations. So I created this library of systemic relations, which is quite extensive now and very cumbersome to use. And you can see the result of it here. It's like a 1 gigamap that uses the library to as far as possible. You have the structural relations, associative, semantic, and thematic relations, social relations, and the hard causal relations, etc. And within of all of those 5 groups, you have a lot of different subgroups, and you even have a group with relations that are not possible to depict with arrows at all. So opening up this box makes everything much more complicated. And you can see the struggle even in this map. How many black arrows are there which sort of escaped being put into these categories? So this is the praxeology. It's more about the practice. It's not the perfect. It will never be perfect. It will never be resolving everything for you. But it's a way of thinking that I think is absolutely necessary to stop just drawing these arrows, but to say, tell us what is this arrow? If you think about 2 entities, there might be many arrows between 2 entities. Just checking. My time is running. Okay, so this is how it can look in practice. It's done with a leader group in a company of very professional consultants, and it looks quite tentative and designed in the moment and not following any of the modeling principles of systems dynamics anyway. It's sort of a mix of a timeline and a relational model. And this one, which has been quite an important map for me because I liked it so much, but I just couldn't understand the damn shit of it. You cannot read it. It's impossible to read. Why do I like it? And I had to really try to understand what is the attraction of this map. Well, first thing is that it's so dominantly focusing on the relations, and it has layers and layers, and it really depicts the richness of the system. I will come back to that towards the end of the lecture. So I'm just wondering if I should, I'm going for 5 minutes and take a break, and then I go for maybe 20 minutes more, and then we have some questions and answers. I hope that's okay.
Yes, perfect, thank you.
So what is a gigamap? A gigamap is super extensive mapping across multiple layers, scales, and genres, investigating relations between seemingly separated categories. It must go beyond linear cause effect diagramming. It's a tool to increase and aid our capacity to grasp and work with super complexity and to dance with the system. So its intention is not to create a perfect picture of a system. As you may remember what Donella Meadows said, we cannot grasp the systems. I don't believe in that it's possible to make the perfect picture of a system and from that really being able to work the system. But it increases our capacity and it helps us to understand many more aspects and layers of a system. Yeah. Its purpose to grasp complexity. The system, its sub and suprasystem, its environment and its landscape. To design, share, align, and criticize an image of a complex situation. So there it's already about a dialogue, sort of. To understand and share problem fields, networks of problems, or what we call problematiques. As you might know, a problem never appears alone. It always comes in a squadron. and some of them attack you from behind. And to modulate what is relevant for your project, to sort out what to work with first, etc., and to modulate it. This means that maybe you have to pull back things that you think are not so relevant in the beginning. If you make a PhD project, you think in the start something is relevant and others not, and this will change. And this actually helps you a lot to do that. To critique boundaries. How far is your project reaching? How well framed is it, or how narrowly framed is it? And how will that change during the process? And to seamlessly move from the descriptive and to the generative. So you start with describing something, and then you suddenly find yourself, oh, it should be like this instead. And you start to draw relations that don't exist, or you put new entities into the system. So this simple diagram, I actually should renew it because there should be some more things here, but you can see how the GigaMap doesn't remove any other types of diagrams or ways of visualizing materials or anything. In contrary, it connects those different ways of seeing. It's a diagram itself, but it also embraces other types of diagrams. So you can add the service design blueprint there and connect it with some statistics. That's the beauty of it, because you can bring these things together. I made this, just put in this because I guess you will have this presentation later, so I'm not going to really walk through this, but I put it here so we can think about it and look at it later. It just tells you what kind of visual mapping would be useful for when in the process or for what, and all together combined it in the GigaMap. So let me just, I will just finish this. I will go to here, just a few more, and then we'll take a break because that's natural. Okay, so I just put in some examples of GigaMaps and just to show you how diverse they can be. So another issue that is sort of a cultural jump for some people, while mapping in general is a way of ordering and simplifying issues, so to say, to try to tame the problems. If you know the wicked problems and the tame problems, Rittel says you cannot tame a wicked problem. If you can tame it, it's not a wicked problem. It's just you don't understand the tame problem properly from the start. You cannot tame the problems. Gigamapping doesn't intend to tame any problems. It intends to maintain the complexity, not to simplify. Gigamaps try to grasp, embrace, and mirror the complexity and the wickedness of real-life problems. So one of the really harmful ways of thinking that have been that were dominant in design was this idea of simplification, because it was done so simply. It was not done carefully. I mean, you have to be honest, you have to simplify at some stage in your process, or you have to pull out some things on the cost of others. It's natural, but simplification itself has no value except if it's done in a very, very careful and in a mindful way that maintains the complex nature of the problem you're working with. So gigamaps are not resolved logically, so don't be worried about the logic. There can be contradictions or anything there. Nor is the designly urge for order allowed to take over, the order I talked about before. Don't let that dominate you, and too much and hence bias the interpretation of reality. So let reality bleed through the map as much as possible. and don't let the design order take over. This map is intentionally vague. If your map is vague, it's just a result of the difficulty you face. It's not possible to make a perfect map of a system, as we already said. Therefore, it has to be vague. It has to be incomplete and unresolved. An inclusive and undogmatic approach to large-scale mapping, hard framing and imposed rules are counterproductive and limiting. So allow yourself to be flexible and free in the way of you doing it. And it's a tool for inquiry. It's not a kind of a tool that gives you necessarily the results or the solutions, but it's a tool for you to be curious and to investigate things and to discuss and to communicate, which I will come back to. The maps are themselves design artifacts developed through design iterations. So you make them over several generations and you redesign them. And they span from myriads of details to large scale patterns. This two more. So the important thing is that you compose the perspectives. As I said, you pull all those different models and different mapping things, but also different perspectives into the map. In design, we are navigating complexities that are crossing technological, biological, and social realms. You never can discuss those realms separate. You never can discuss technology separate from social or from human. We deal with both deterministic and unpredictable systems, framed and tamed ones, as well as wild and wicked ones. We are both on the soft and the hard ends of the systems approaches. That means we are both working with soft systems inspired methodologies and with, let's say, system dynamics methodologies. It's all there together and it's pulled together in this kind of idea of critical systems thinking. And we must engage in all scales of the systems. This is kind of a little bit of a placeholder for making sure that you engage in different perspectives when you're working with systems. And in the end, before we go to the next chapter, a small warning. Systems are dynamic. They change. While we plan, they change. So we always plan for the system that was there. So it's a bit of a catch-22. And the GigaMap is quite static. We are working with that, but it's very, very hard to put a dynamic change into a GigaMap. So we can think of it more like it's like a notation for dancing with systems rather than a correct picture of a system. So with this, we will talk a little bit more about social systems, and I will give you the sense sharing model. And towards the end, I will show you some really practical way of using this in your PhD research, in your literature, work with literature review. So let's take 5 minutes and get back 5 to 11. And I hope I will be done 15 past 11. I can go on for some more minutes if it's okay, if you have a lot of questions, etc.
Thank you. Yes, the lecture is longer than 11:30. So if you have time, there is no problem for us to stay here.
No stress then. That's wonderful. Except I'm worried about exhausting you guys. So let's see you in 5 minutes then.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we will talk about the process, like the giga mapping process as a social system in its own right, because that has been shown to be maybe the most important part of it, which we are exploring a lot in the moment. The relativity etching by Escher sort of shows what we're talking about, that we are very often in the same room, but we have so different perspectives that we can talk together. We think we share the same reality, and we can talk together, but our conception of what is said can be quite different. So this is where this kind of mapping and visual thinking processes come in as very helpful. So we call this misunderstandings and information gaps. It's not only that we we don't understand each other properly, but it's also about different backgrounds and different expertises, different knowledges, etc. So we call this for ruptures. And the ruptures are caused by information overload, causes decision based on short memory. Like we have a process where we have a lot of information, a complex system, and we don't have a memory capacity to really keep everything in play for the whole team. And so we end up with making decisions based on things we have forgotten, or that actually can turn out to be important. They are lost. The ruptures can be by not understanding the clients or the stakeholders well enough. There can be disalignment within the organization. There can be implementation problems. Like very typically, we are actually working with this in research projects, 2 research projects, and typically the companies that are partnering in this research project, they report information breakdown between planning groups and implementation groups. That's very typical. The horizons can be framed too narrow or too wide or wrongly. And there can be different conceptions of systems, shape, extent, connectivity, and structure. And there can be different sensitivity towards the system. Just another example. So this is just a matrix to show possible ruptures between, let's say, simple designer or individual designer, design team, client, etc. So it's just simple matrix to show all the possible ruptures that we can experience in a design project and which are normal to experience. One way of really trying to bridge these ruptures is, of course, through co-inquiry or co-creation and co-design processes, which has a long tradition in the design field. Also, the Scandinavian participatory design thread is quite prominent in that. By bringing a lot of the voices to the table, the idea is that more different positions are heard, and one can adapt the design solution better to those stakeholders. Now, the critique of this is, of course, that we get this kind of what you would say, very mellow or very downplayed solutions that also often called design by committee, that there's no real edge to it. There's powerless and bleak and gray solutions that comes out of it. Now I think we are just in the start of understanding those processes, and we are just now running a process with absolutely everybody at our school. It's about 700-800 people. We are a small school, but everybody is actually involved in that in a co-process to change the school culture. This is from a student project with the Norwegian, the Directorate for Elderly Homes of Oslo, where they work with people from that directorate who had a total breakdown of communication in a real reorganization process, where the students provided visual tools which really helped those people out of the communication breakdown. They had huge ruptures in their communication. They were actually recording conversations, and it was obvious that they were saying sentences which were misunderstood by the other people in the same group. So there were huge problems. Another example. So bridging mind models. Gigamaps mapping is about more than bridging between actors and bringing their knowledge to the table or exchanging data, information, and creating rich interconnected pictures from that. This is what happens in the more normal co-design thinking. Is about when you talk about co-design or participatory design, it's about gathering knowledge and creating insights. Our students do that very often. Then they come up with some insights and they use that as design input. It's quite lame to my mind. It's not really very powerful to do that. It's just one step further than doing an interview with people. So just collecting facts. But gigamapping process is more than that, because it's really about a dialogue and a conversation, and it creates more things than that. It creates those aligned sensitivities for the task at hand. And as we know, the dancing is about more than facts. So if you want to dance, it's not enough to just have the facts from people. You have to know that you are on the same page, that you have the same aligned sensitivity. And if you remember this map I showed you where I said, I love it, but I don't know exactly why, that's actually what triggered it, because this map gave something very different than the facts. It gave some aligned sensitivities of the system, and I will explain what that is. It's all about sharing. So I'll just distinguish between hard sharing and soft sharing. So hard sharing is about sharing facts. This is also from a systems-oriented design project. It's all about facts, a matrix about different psychological conditions, what kind of different symptoms they have. So this is like a fact-based mapping of quite complex information. That's it. But soft sharing is about sensibility, about the sense, how you sense the system, far beyond what the facts are and what the quantitative and the concrete hard facts are in the system. So this involves a sense of the field itself, a sense of the gestalt of the system. We're back to this notion of the gestalt. It's like the figure of the system, a sense of degree of complexity, a sense of timing and dynamics, a sense of the needed effort, and a sense of resistance. There can be more things here, but this is what we singled out so far. And I will go shortly through all of them just by associating to some gigamapping. So the first one is sharing a sense of the field. If you work in a project together with other people, and you typically have, for example, an interdisciplinary group, each of those people will have a totally different conception of the field they're working in. It's a very, very typical rupture, and it really complicates working interdisciplinary with complexity. It's almost devastating. So if you don't bridge that rupture, you can run into really big trouble. By sitting down together and discussing and including and excluding parts of the different experts' notion of what does the field entail, you will reach a common ground, and you will at least know that this guy who's an expert in psychology has a different notion, a different conception of the field. He understands fairly where I am because we have discussed it and we have been drawing it, but I know he's not really knowledgeable about it. And this level, it's not about knowing everything about everything, but it's about knowing enough so that we know our limitations and know the strengths and the limitations of our colleagues and our team members. Sharing a sense of degree of complexity. So if we have a team, let's say, because when we do work with complexity, it's always about a team, isn't it? A team that has to dance. If you work in a team and some people think this is really quite simple and others think it's super complex, you have a serious problem in the team. You have at least to understand that this other guy thinks this is very simple, and I know why he thinks this simple. But I also know that he knows that I think it's complex and why I think it's complex. This is the level of sense sharing one needs to reach in a team to make it function for working with complexity. A sense of resistance. This means how difficult will it be to implement a systems change or to implement or realize the project. So if some people in the team think it's very simple, it will be the easy peasy cake. They can't see all the obstacles and others see only problems. You again have a rupture. You have a problem in the team that needs to work with a complex system. So at least again to know about those differences, maybe to reach a common ground and to single out what to start to work with. It's all part of the common dialogue in gigamapping. Similar to this, the sense of sharing a sense of needed effort. As we all know, this is always underestimated, at least in all IT projects, but also in all other fairly complex projects. Needed effort is always underestimated. We always think it's easier to reach this goal than it is. So really sharing the same picture and having a more realistic picture is also part of that. And the gestalt of the system is about, for example, is it a very top-heavy system? Does it have a big leader group that is very authoritarian, or does it have a more horizontal organization, etc., to share this sense of how is actually the figure of the system? It's quite important. So these were just shortly going through the sense sharing, and these are all parts and things that go far beyond sharing the nitty-gritty details, facts, and information parts. And I think, in a way, this sense sharing aspect of gigamapping is probably more important and more valuable than the fact sharing, because the fact sharing is very good, but honestly, you will never be able to share all the facts between different experts, but you will have a sort of a sense of it again, rather than sharing it totally. Okay, so this was what I wanted to say, but in the end, I wanted to show you a little bit about a PhD thesis, which was finalized in 2020, last year, by Manuela Aguirre, a Chilean design researcher who is working in Norway and also has been part of the SOD environment for many years. And she used the same gigamapping techniques on her literature review, which obviously is very intelligent to do it this way, because you don't look at the singular authors, but you look at authors as as elements in a knowledge ecology and in a network of different fields and expertises. So here are some pictures of her mapping, a very early workshop to the left, where she engaged with students to help her. Here she made a categorization sort of, and I think she didn't actually use this result from this workshop very much because I think she saw that her framing was a bit wrong later. But it was a very interesting way of, a very interesting rehearsal. You can see there's a timeline towards the center of the circle. So it looked much more, I was talking about vague and messy, didn't I? It looked more like this. And if you see here, it's her 11th iteration of how to understand this kind of knowledge system of her literature. And in the end, she did this kind of things, and she did something very clever to add a portrait to each of the authors. This is just a small part of it. Adding a portrait gives you additional information and gives you also a memory crutch. So if you want to read more about this thesis, and you can see even the videos from the dissertation and from the trial lecture. She had a wonderful trial lecture about discussing Bela Banathy and structures of power. It's really worth looking at. So I could just bring you to this. Can you see the, can you see it? Can you see the web? Yeah, okay. This is the systems-oriented design web. If you don't have been there, you don't know it. We will redesign it soon.
Sorry, Birger. Yeah? No, we see the slide, not the web.
Okay, okay. I will just have to stop share and reshare. Quickly there. Okay. So this is our webpage. This is her trial lecture, Manuela's trial lecture. I will find oh, it's so slow. Yeah, this is about her thesis, and it has both the dissertation video, but also the full thesis. You can just download it from here, and the whole dissertation. And it probably is different than from in Italy, but because I know there's big differences between the countries. For inspiration, I think this thesis is really good. It got really great response from a very high level and critical committee. So it's worth checking it out. On this site, you also have a lot more information about different tools, frameworks, a lot of projects, our Design for Democracy work, which we will pull back up now. Yeah, so if you wonder more about this, you can go to the site and use it as a resource. So this gives us some time for questions and discussions. What are your questions? What are the white spots after this lecture?
Hi, Professor. My name is Flavio Pino. I come from management engineering, so I'm pretty new to design. And I was wondering, my research field is regarding competition in online platforms, with especially focusing on regulation of online platforms. And I was pretty... regulation.
Can you repeat? I didn't understand.
Yeah, competition and regulation on online platforms, so such as Google, Amazon, and similar.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, let's say, about the aim, boundaries, and ethics that you partially discussed with gigamapping, in the sense that what I was thinking is gigamapping helps to visualize the complexity that can be, for example, inside of a firm. Especially when talking about online platforms, there are a really high number of actors and connections that are very difficult to visualize all at once. My question is, how do you think it's possible to integrate, let's say, inside the gigamapping, the interests of stakeholders that could be deemed by firms as useless? Just to make an example, when if Amazon decided to build a gigamap to try and understand how their processes integrate and interact within different stakeholders, how do you think it will be possible to put an accent on those stakeholders that are marginal to Amazon, but on which Amazon has a greater effect, for example, consumers? Do you think it will be in the scope of gigamapping, or do you think other tools will be better suited? Thank you.
I think other tools. I think gigamapping is a very good tool for that, because it doesn't have the limitations. It's flexible and you can adapt it. So for Amazon is a good example, because it's actually a very good example that you come with, because it's about where is the boundary of your system. So does it include the Amazon workers? Very, very recent events are about Amazon exploiting workers in a very bad way. So would your system map include the backside? We frequently criticize service design for only be looking at the surface of the systems, like looking at the users, and a little bit about the backbones, but only what is relevant to deliver the service to the users, not at the unintended effects and not deeply into the systems. So I would say the technique of gigamapping is a very good tool for doing this kind of investigations and to doing it beyond what the client immediately thinks is useful. I think there's a dialogue and the challenging of clients that is going on. And honestly speaking, Amazon doesn't know what they're doing, and Facebook didn't know what they were doing at all. Didn't know that, they didn't plan Facebook. Facebook was emerging, it was an emergent phenomenon. It emerged from users and it grew organically. That's how it went. It wasn't planned like that. And that's what's happened more and more. Emergent phenomena, emergent systems are playing a more and more important role in design and industry development. So you would things that you wouldn't imagine that could happen, they're happening. And we start to know strategies and tactics how to design for emergent systems. One example is just the notion of versioning in software. You know, version 1, version 2, version 3. You forget the idea of making a complete finalized thing, because you know there's so much complexity out there. There's so much user kickback that you have to be flexible. You have to take in account that there will be unexpected reactions. So using the gigamap to really expand and include those seemingly uninteresting, marginalized actors and stakeholders. There's several good reasons to do that, because you might, from the company's cynical point of view, you might find some really potential very good things there that it can be very profitable or something, or the new development of something new. So for creativity, it's very good to be very inclusive, at least in the start. For ethical and political reasons, it's obvious you have to understand the whole system. You have to understand that there are actually people sorting, putting books in boxes, etc. And for Amazon, honestly, I don't know how long they can get away with this in America, but I stopped buying books at Amazon because I think they are assholes. I don't like this guy. He's a big asshole. I don't like him. So I'm not buying any. I was a big customer of Amazon. I'm not anymore. And I'm thinking I'm not the only one, because how long can they get away with it in the US? I don't know. I think they are starting to hit the wall. And for a company to not understand how the system of their customers and their stakeholders really works is catastrophic. That they don't know they have to behave to be a sympathetic company if they don't want to hit some kind of barrier sometime. That's my answer. And this Giga Mapping helps. By the way, do you know this book, Management Through Design?
No, never.
Let me just
heard of it before.
It could be a bridge for you to understand more this design aspect. Any other questions or more questions, comments?
Thanks so much. Sorry, I just wanted to make just an additional question, sorry. Yeah. Last lesson, we had Peter Jones explain us some leverage measures onto maps and graphs. I wanted to ask you, do you think that leverage measures could be useful in Giga Mapping, or they would, let's say, hinder too much the free form of the Giga Mapping that you were talking before?
No, I think you can include or integrate. I mean, one really central purpose of the Giga Map is to help you to integrate, for example, this aspect with, let's say, something else, let's say some statistics or some system dynamics modeling or whatever, because you can put apples and bananas into the same space and you can draw lines between them. That's one of the central aspects of Giga Mapping. So you can integrate that into the Giga Map, and there you can explore what does it mean to the whole system. Where does it kick in? Where does it make sense, etc.?
Okay, thank you so much.
Good morning, Professor. First of all, thank you very much for the inspiring lecture, and also the paper that Professor Barbero gave to us. While you were talking, I opened like 10 tabs in my browser with different references you were citing, so thank you very much. From your lecture and also from the paper about Giga Mapping, I was really inspired by that thing. I think the best synthesis is a thing you said in the beginning, almost in the beginning, like having a methodology without methods. And I think it's very interesting because to me inspired a very good way to stimulate critical thinking and I don't know how to call it, mindful thinking in some way. That I think that it's a very interesting component in design education, since a lot of time I see that we all strive for methods, for how to do things. We also obey to very strong dogmas. I see, for example, in graphic design, you know, when someone says, don't use Comic Sans, don't stretch fonts, that, okay, obviously there are reasons not to do that, but there are very strong dogmas that I see when I talk with other people, not designer. Sometimes you really ask, but why I have to be so rigid about this thing? It's really so important. It's really right. So I really like this aspect of the process of Giga Mapping you explained. And about that, my question is, in the education process, how do you stimulate this openness, but also without getting the students lost, obviously. Like, so really, where is the threshold? How can you stimulate this critical view, this really open view, this always I don't know how to say, this view always in discussion and giving the students freedoms, but also transferring them something that is understandable, is scalable, is can evolve inside the mind of the students.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool question. Yeah, I mean, if you look at systems-oriented design as a practice and praxeology foremost, this means that you actually have to practice it to understand it. Since I'm Norwegian, I always use the example of ski jumping. So in Trondheim, there's a university, and they have a whole institute for researching ski jumping with airflow tunnels and video analysis and computing and artificial intelligence and everything. So you can read all those papers and reports, and then you can go to the top of the ski jump and you can jump. And you can see what happens. You will probably die. So this just shows that you cannot explain everything. You have to, a lot of the learning you have to do, and you have to do it in a painful way. You will have to start on a small hill that doesn't kill you, and then you have to jump and you have to probably fall and you get beaten up. And it's what we do is to try to tell the students it's okay to get lost. That's the first thing. The first thing we tell them, you will be lost. You will be totally frustrated and you will be totally lost. And then I tell them, but I never experienced people getting unstuck and getting unlost. Honestly, I never experienced that. They always get out from that forest. So the first thing is we are taught to live in very dependent situations, learning the situations where the teacher's role is to hold the hands and to bring you through. So of course we hold hands and we do a lot of tutoring, etc., and practical advices, and we have a lot of practice tricks to do to get unstuck, etc. But the most important is to build the confidence that yes, you are in the middle of a dark forest. You cannot see any solution out. You cannot understand what the way out is, but you will find it. Just bang your head against the wall, it will fall down. It happens every time. And to build that confidence is very important and central for people who are working with complexity. I have a very cool example why this flexibility and independence methodology is so important. This is a real life example from a company called Halogen. They worked with interdirectoral problem with two different government bodies who didn't have any communication at all. And they included in their methods, in their practice, to go eat dinner together and drink beers. This was part of their methodology. It was totally needed, and they had 10 dinners with these people before they managed to get to the same level and start to talk. That hard was the division and the siloing, and that complex this was. So you have to do what you have to do. Did that answer it?
Yeah, thank you very much. This was really inspiring. Really, thank you. Do you have maybe also some references on that part of the education process on these?
Yeah, I think there's something on the website, but this will be in the book also, a lot of the praxeology. And I think what happens is you know, the GigaMap is like a design artifact, and you develop it with several iterations. So it's like if you are a designer or an engineer, you maybe start with an idea or maybe a napkin sketch in a cafe. And if you're a very young designer, you think you're almost done after that. If you are an experienced designer, you know there's like a long way to go before this is a real design. So it's the same with the GigaMapping process, that you start with a cafe napkin sketch, and you develop it and you change it. And this also, it's all about developing your thinking and your conception and your dialogue with your team and all these kind of things. So this all, actually, it's all about you're designing a system for an existing system, but you also are part of a system. You are inside a system that is doing that. The GigaMapping team is a system, a social system in its own right. That's why you have to go drink beers and things like that.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Birger. It's Eliana. Here we meet again. Hope you're doing well.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation, and it's always good to hear from you and from updates from the side of the GigaMaps. Thanks also for the nice sketch about the nice suggestion about the GigaMapping connecting to the literature review process, because I never thought about it, but actually it could be a good way to map and cluster the papers. But going to the question, I have a very practical question, since as Silvia said before, we have this course of systems modeling. So I was just wondering if when you were explaining the shift from the systems modeling to the GigaMaps, I was wondering if you integrate system modeling into GigaMaps, or it was kind of an evolution of the practice. So it's a very practical question to understand. Okay, when start building a GigaMap, should we take into consideration the system model first and then evolve into a GigaMap, or did you use totally different data collecting, data sourcing, and other methodologies to arrive to GigaMaps?
No, you can do it whatever way you want. It's no catastrophe. There's nothing explodes if you do it one or the other way. So it depends on what you, well, practical reason, do you have the course in the beginning or not? So if you have the beginning, you do the course first and you do the modeling, and then you start to develop the GigaMapping. If you already have done some GigaMapping, you insert the model, let's say if it's a system dynamic model, into the GigaMap, and you draw lines and see how it's interconnect or how you can connect it. What parts of your GigaMap does the system dynamics model reflect to? I'm doing a little bit of systems dynamics modeling when it depends what it is. I did it with to understand the Norwegian housing market, because I think it's the same in many places. It's spiraling out of control, the property market. And for that, it's very sensible to use the system dynamics modeling. However, GigaMapping is something you can start with right away. You don't need to prepare anything. Actually, you shouldn't prepare anything. If you are a group of people, or even if you are alone, just sit down, start to map out everything you know that is relevant to the issue at hand, and even be very uncritical about what is relevant. Maybe you just even turn off the relevance filter. Just map out the field you are in, as far as it makes sense, because it's fun. Just be curious, and this will give you a sort of a skeleton, which is probably very speculative and very wrong in many ways. But it also teases out, if you are a team, it teases out a lot of the knowledge that is already there. That's how we normally start. And then we start to look at this map and search for the white spots, search for the really speculative things that maybe probably not true, or maybe very, very questionable. And we start to investigate those things. So this is the SIP analysis, which you can read about on the web, which helps you to guide a further process of investigation. So you are not totally lost in a white space, but you have some guidance of what to investigate first and what are low-hanging fruits, etc. And then this kind of course can come in as a contrast, and it can be inserted into that field as long as it is the same, let's say, thematic, or it had the same compass direction or something like that. So there's no right or wrong. It's just operate according to the practicalities of your project. One resource obviously is time. That is very guiding for how far you go. Did that answer it, sort of, or?
Yeah, sure. I was so trying to, yeah. Could you confirm so that, I don't know, a system model could be already a synthesis of data, and
Yeah.
instead a gigamap is more generative, and maybe you iterate on making it more perfect, let's say more accurate.
Yeah.
Instead,
yes, there's a notion of triangulation. Probably have heard before. It's used in case studies methodology. Robert Yin, if you know this book. I'll just put it here. It's a classic. He describes triangulation as it's almost like a reporter. You need to have a journalist. He needs to have several sources to confirm and information from informant. So if you have let's say you have a data model that somebody you self-made, or it's totally quantitative, or it's provided from somebody, or you have some statistics or something, and then you can enrich this information and triangulate it to see if that really reflects what people on the street experience in real life. So you can go out and ask, maybe you can ask 5 people, or you can engage 10 people to be investigators, and to each of them ask 10 people. Or you can just have a very deep, long conversation with some experts. So, I mean, this is the strength, that you're not stuck in one corner of the knowledge format. You're not stuck in a data model or in a statistics, but you can combine that and modify it with qualitative, in all kinds of qualitative investigations. And then you can add generative, and you do this in the gigamap by drawing lines and by taking notes in the map. And then you can add those things that, well, this should be, this question in this questionnaire, quantitative investigation should be posed differently, or you can draw a new line or do a new invention somewhere.
thanks.
There's something I can just mention one thing that might be very important I didn't mention. It's about the dialogue, using it as a dialogue tool. So you're using the map, if you approach an expert, you're using it as a dialogue tool. So you bring it to them and you ask to draw, etc. This helps to verify that you understand what he's saying in the moment. If you have a workshop with a team of people, you make sure that they take notes, that they draw, etc. It's a very efficient way of recording the conversation. If they don't draw and if don't write, you lose the information. Alternatively, you can, of course, make a video recording of everything, but then you have to watch the whole thing again. It's very, very efficient to do it this way. The other thing, which is probably the most interesting thing, is if you have a group of people discussing something, you can have a jumping conversation without people falling off the wagon. This is amazing. So this is a friend of mine who is a management consultant. He discovered this and made me aware of this, that you can have a meeting in a leadership group of a company, and they can skip the agenda. They just have a theme, and they can jump around in that conversation. And everybody, if there is a jump, everybody can jump with, because you use the map and you point. You say, like, over here we have to do this and this. Over here we have to strengthen this technology or something. It's amazing. And it's actually having this jumping conversation without people, so that everybody jumps with the jumps. It's actually a condition, if you think about it, it's a condition for discussing whole systems. You have to jump around to really discuss a whole system. It's amazing. It's so cool. It works every time. The only time it didn't work was with a bunch of really old, grumpy design professors. That's my only experience when it didn't work. More?
Any other question? Katerina, Eva, David?
Yeah.
Please.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Eva. My PhD research is about industrial reconversion and firm diversification production, and so on. I'm searching about also some tools about the economic complexity. So methods to untangle the economic complexity.
I like it.
So I was wondering if you deal also with this topic of economic complexity. I mean production, in terms of production. So mapping what a country or region produce in terms of food, components, products, and so on.
Yes. I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I would probably also use a format for this, like more like flow diagrams or something like that, which makes sense. But maybe increase the complexity of those diagrams, which normally are very simplified. But what you want is to get the richness and layers of these things, and therefore you have to be brave and don't shy away from reaching very, very complex diagrams that in the end are not readable for anybody than yourself or your team. And then make this accessible through some videos or something. Now, in this, I would also, I mean, economy has always this, economy is a human artifact. So it always has also emotional, cultural, and social aspects. So if you want to look at economy in a systemic way, you wouldn't shy away from breaching those barriers that are given by the field and combining it with emotions of northern Italy or whatever, I don't know. I think it's about politics. It's about, I have this example of a paper cup and explain how this paper cup, like a paper coffee cup, and end up with explaining how complex it is and what are the political aspects of that cup. So this is the way of thinking, actually, to check out the boundaries of your thinking. Is it worth to jump outside of those boundaries for a while and see if there's something super interesting there that could really create some innovation and some change the thinking about this. So I would do these things. I would do this really thorough flow diagramming, but in addition, put it in the center of GigaMap and see how can I play around with the boundary of this system, see what's outside, how is it connected, what is seemingly uninteresting or seemingly unimportant that might be quite important if you look at it twice.
Okay, thank you.
And you can, you know, the issue of time, you can say, okay, I can invest 1 week on this, and I do it, and I bring some people and I try to do it. And if it's not looks promising after 1 week, I stop it. If it looks promising, I continue. So this is the way you should manage your time there.
Thank you. Your presentation was very inspiring. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'm very happy. I'm always nervous before presenting. I'm wishing you really good luck with your work and just buffer on every day a little bit and start writing early. This is my most important suggestion for a PhD, is to don't postpone the writing, because writing is not just writing, writing is thinking. So if you are stuck in a process where you think, and you don't write, it's a bit, it should have a little bit of a signal there, because if you think on something and then you try to write it down, even if you know it's not the final text, this really helps you. And start with this today, writing.
Thank you about that. Maybe also gigamapping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We already said that.
Yeah.
But in the end, you have to bring up a text, and you can have a lot of illustrations there, but the text is, I will just find this management through design. Let me just try to go to my memory. I didn't find it right. Management as design. I will just put up the reference in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Or it was for Flavio. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. If there is any other question, I can thank you again for this lecture and for the time. And see you soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. If you have individual thoughts or ideas or questions, you can always email me. I can't guarantee that I always answer, but I mostly answer.
Sure. And of course, they will have maybe the chance to meet you at RSD 10 in November.
Yeah, I will be there. I won't present anything, but because I'm finishing the book, but I will participate, hopefully in person, if possible.
Me too. Yeah. I'm also trying to. Then we cannot do a lot of forecast for the next month, but the plan A is to come there. Then we will see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. It was very cool to have this event with you, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you. I will send you the recording.
Thank you.
Like.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.